So good morning and welcome to my YouTube channel. This morning we've got a break in the weather. We've had really bad weather all week, heavy rain. So what I thought I'd do is, because the weekend's looking pretty good, which means there's no rain, I thought I'd come to one of the local woods and take a wander to look for compositions or photographs. So we've got about 7 or 8 different woodlands within a mile radius of our house. So this particular one I've never actually explored before, but I've heard that there's a pond in here somewhere. So join me in my journey and we'll see what we can find this morning. So I'm now in the woods. I have to admit, a fair wee hike and steep, but as you can see, this composition would be quite amazing if the light, so if the sun was up a wee bit higher and the clouds weren't obscuring the sun, these trees and the leaves would be lit up. But what I did notice, if I walk back, there is some light getting cast on the moss and the trees along the path. But I can see behind the camera that the sun might be peeking out of the clouds. So what I'll do is I'll get set up just in case the sun comes out. I know I've just come into the forest, but I can see so many compositions already. So what I'll do is I'll get my camera set up and I'll start taking shots to try and get the best advantage of this light. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but the sun has just come up behind us and it's lighting up the pathway into the woods. On the left hand side, those beech trees are lit up. So what I've done is I've set my camera up at manual. I've set it for 1/4 of a second, f11 and ISO 50. I've set it to a 2-second timer. And yep, and I'll show you that photo at the end of this sequence. What I'll do is I'll hit another more because the sun's becoming stronger and stronger. So the other thing to look for is when I take this photo, because the sun's behind me, my shadow is cast in front of the tree. So what I'll do is I'll set my exposure, my timer to 10 seconds and then move up behind this camera so that my shadow's not in the way, and then hopefully we'll get a nice exposure. And there we go. So let me check that. Yep. So Gordon in the last video had asked, if you're a beginner, how do you actually know what settings to take? So what I'll do is I'll create another video and explain it in more detail. But basically, this view that I have is my composition. And composition, what photographers look for, and if you're in a camera club and you're being judged, what you look for is you've actually got a 2D image with a 3D background. But effectively you're looking for leading lines, you're looking for what focal length you're going to use, and believe it or not, if you use your aperture, which would be your f-stop, so that's f2.8, f5.6, f10, f11, f22 exact for example, that allows you to use your focal distance so you can see what you want in focus. And if you set something really close, then the back can be out of focus. We've also got the rule of thirds, and the rule of thirds, if you imagine a 9 square grid, so depending on what element of your photograph you want to focus on, the rule of thirds teaches you to give it space. So if I took that tree right in the centre of my shot, it wouldn't look as attractive as if I had that tree on the left hand side of my shot and in the centre of the grid. Then I've got space, and it's all about space and how you can walk through it. And equally, if you're into publishing and you send an image to an editor, then they need space to add text. So what I'll do is I'll keep wandering and let's see what we can find. So I actually have turned round and looked back from where I started, and Gordon also asked, how do you know what settings to use? So if you're a beginner, a quick tip would be shoot on auto and then read the settings. So the settings you want to look for is aperture, ISO and shutter speed. The other way, a quick way to determine how well your shot's exposed, is to look at the viewfinder in the back of your camera if you've got one. And if you don't have one, that is your exposure meter at the bottom, from -3 to +3. And if you look in your viewfinder, you'll see a miniature exposure meter in your camera, and that lets you see if you're underexposed or overexposed. And if it's at 0, then that'll give you a good guide that it's correctly exposed. But if I'm using live view, so we've lost the sun just now, but to give you an example, if I change the shutter speed and I increase the shutter speed to 15 seconds, that automatically darkens my photo because there's not as much light coming in. If I then set that shutter speed to a longer exposure, so I'll go to the extreme of say 2.5 seconds, that's now starting to let in too much light. So I've set the aperture to f11 because I want that back to front detail as much as I possibly can, but my focal point are those rocks in the centre of the photograph. So if I reduce my exposure, you'll start to see the change in the exposure on the back of my live view. Now the other thing I'm conscious of is I've got to watch the highlights. So if I make it too bright, the sky will be blown out and I won't be able to recover the detail later on. Now I can check that by using my histogram, and histogram's good for you checking your shadows, your midtones and your highlights, but I'll do another video around how to use a histogram later on. So what I've done is I'm going to focus in, so I'll focus in on those central rocks and the sun's shining up. So I've got my ISO set at 50. I was also asked why did I use ISO 50 for some of my shots. So in a brighter situation, ISO 50 on my camera gives me great detail, but it also allows me to crop. And when I crop, that means I get a lot of detail out of it. Now equally, people will argue there's not a huge difference between ISO 50 and 100, but in my camera it does give me that wee bit extra advantage. So I've got my camera set to 2-second timer, and there you go, there's the image. So what I might do is I'll bracket this exposure just to make sure. Oh, and there's the sun coming up. So if I adjust my settings, now you start to see the sun's up, so the scene's got brighter. So what I'll do is I'll speed up the shutter speed, so I'll make it a 4-second exposure. Then what I'll do is I'll bracket, and again I'll explain in another video what bracketing is and how bracket helps you. But when you bracket, that'll take 5 or 6 different images for me that goes from way underexposed, right through the range to overexposed, and then that allows me in Photoshop to bring those 5 or 6 photos together and blend them. So that's, you could photo stack them like we did in the last video, but you can also do a HDR blend, and again I'll show you that in another video. But it just gives us lots of options to play with. So I'll take one more shot. I'll just brighten that just a tad. So I'm changing this to 1/4 of a second now. And again, I've got my lens on manual mode and I'm manually focusing. Well, if you like trees, this is a photographer's dream. This area is absolutely beautiful. I've taken quite a lot of photographs already, and I've actually only travelled 50 yards. I'm just everywhere I look, there's a photograph. I'll just turn round and then you can see what I mean. The mosses are so green. I'll leave that there so you can see the sun rising. And what I'll do is, just in case the sun's obscuring the camera, I'll move that over and then you can see what I can see. It's absolutely glorious here. But what I'll do is I'll keep walking and see what more I can find. You know, this would be perfect on a foggy morning and the sun backlighting the fog or the mist, and you would get the profile of the trees. It's absolutely stunning. Actually, I've just seen a composition as I turned round the path between those trees. So I'll tell you what, I'll get set up and I'll turn you back on. Okay, we spoke earlier about composition and leading lines. So I've got an example here. I'm just waiting on the sun coming up again, and that'll backlight the trees, but it'll illuminate this path. So what I mean by leading lines is, when I know it's, what I'll do is I'll increase the exposure time. So what you can see is I've focused between the trees, but I've framed the image with these two trees, so that takes you in. So you've got a triangle shape going in, and then also, as you'll see here on the right hand side where my finger is, that is the leading line of the path that's coming in from the corner and taking you through the centre of the trees. So if the light is kind to me, this could be a really nice shot. I just thought you'd let you see the view as the sun comes up behind the forest. Okay, so earlier I was talking about, as part of your composition, you would look at the aperture. So an example is this stump. So I've just seen this stump. There's amazing textures on it. It's a really nice colour. So what I thought I'd show you the difference between the aperture and how it helps your composition. So if I focus on that tree stump, I've actually set it at f11, but because it's so close to me, that means the background will be out of focus. So for this shot, I don't need a sharp shot all round the tree stump. My focus is the tree stump. So if I take this shot, and then what I'll do is I'll show you what I mean when I post the image. In my last video, I showed you how to focus stack, and I also showed you how I remove some elements of the photo that I didn't want. But my wife explained to me that if anybody was just starting in photography, they wouldn't know why you did that, because to her that was just part of the image. So the reason I took it out is, if I put that into a competition, because that plant was on the left hand side and it was leading the opposite way out of the picture, I would have got a really low mark. So that's why when you're entering competitions where it's permitted, you can edit your photo and take out distractions. So I'm just explaining because my wife thought it would be quite good for people to understand that we're new to photography, why I did that. I'll just show you where I'm walking. I've just spotted through the trees what I thought looks like water, so that must be the pond. So I'm going to try and work my way through these trees. And there is water. Well, I hope it's water. So yeah, I found the pond that I'd heard about. So I'm going to have to do a wee wander around just to look for best places to take photos. I've never been here before, I've never seen it. I'll stay quiet because I don't know what wildlife's about. I'm just... Right, so now I need to look for an area that's clear. Okay, as I've been walking around the pond, I've noticed this boat. So I'm going to use this wee boat as kind of foreground interest. And the first image, I've just also noticed there's two swans swimming right in the centre of the pond there. So I'm going to focus on the boat, and I've put a polarizer on, as you'll see on the front of my camera. And what that'll do is that'll take the glare off the water, and it'll help take the glare off the sky. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two exposures, one for the foreground and one for the sky, and I'll blend them together in Photoshop. What I might do is get my long lens and see if I can get some shots of those swans later on. So the other thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a photo stack. So I'll take a photograph of the boat, I'll go midway into the image and focus there and take another shot, and then I'll try and focus in on the trees in the background, and then again I'll blend those three images together. Okay, I've not long left the area where I found the boat. I tried to walk round the pond on the left hand side, but there was no access. So I've came this way, and actually I've just spotted another pond that the sun's obviously not at it, but what I'll try and do is take you round and show you what I can see. So if the sun hits that wee pond, there's the sun starting to hit the trees now. So maybe I'll have a wee wander round and have a look and see if there's a composition there for us, and we can look at it and take a photo. Okay, so I've been scouting and walking round the pond, but it's actually, it might be, well, I can't even see it being any use to fishermen unless you're in a boat. There's so many trees at the side of the shoreline that there's no access to get a good photograph of the water. So what I'll probably do first of all I'll find my way out of here, and then we'll head back and see if we can see what else we can see, because there's lots of interesting trees round about here with mosses, and when the sun hits them it's really picturesque. However, there's a lot of cloud coming in, so that might be a challenge, but let's see, and hopefully we can get some good images. Okay, so as I've been walking back, I found what looked quite interesting as a composition was the branches with the moss growing on it, and then if you look through there's another set of branches with the moss, and it's kind of framed in a circle in that area with the branches coming in. So what I've done is I've focused in as far as I can. The other reason I'm not going any closer is that area looks really boggy because there's a lot of water over on my right hand side, and I do not want to make the mistake of falling in any bogs again. So what I can do is I can crop this in post-processing. So I've set the aperture to f8, and I'm just tweaking the shutter speed to 1/8 of a second. And then if I zoom in, I can see how sharp that is. Right, so that's nice for the first image. So what I'll now do is I'll actually tone that down a bit. So I'll slow the shutter speed down just a tad. So I'll move to 1/10 of a second. I'll take another shot. And then what I'll do is I'm going to photo stack. So I've got my first image of the first branch, and now I'm going to focus in to the second set of branches. So if I zoom in, and again I'm still on manual focus, so if I focus that manually, then those two pictures I can bring together in post, and then I'll figure out if I want to crop them or leave them. But yeah, that was an interesting composition. Again, when you look at these trees, these branches branching off, again with all the moss, it looks really interesting. Sometimes it looks better in real life, and then when you take a photo it doesn't quite work. We've got an uprooted root on this side, so if I lift you up and just take you over, I'm just going to the edge here because you can see all that water and I don't want to fall in. But that uprooted tree with the roots and lots of moss, so that's obviously been there for a few years. But again, I'm just not going to take the risk to go any further. So, and then what I've just spotted as I've been speaking to you is this tree. That actually might be quite a nice composition with the way that the branches are leading in and out, albeit with that branch kind of being in the way. So what I might do is put my wide angle lens on and get a bit closer to that tree and just see if I can get an image from here. Okay, so I'm going to have a wee try and use this old tree as a composition, because we've got a branch in 3 different directions. So what I'll do is, let me see how this looks. Right, so if I just tweak that round a bit, and then if I focus in the foreground, so that's sharp. And if I use the leading branch, if I focus in midway into the photo, to right there, that's sharp. And then if I focus further out of the photo, like that. And there's the image, so hopefully in post that comes out quite nice. I brought a wee flask with me this morning, just in case. True enough, because I don't know about you, but there's just something about being outside in the middle of nowhere, hearing all the sounds. My wee breakfast bat. I can hear a bird of prey circling round about me. I have no idea what it is, but we do get a lot of kites round about this area. We get a lot of buzzards, so yeah, who knows, I'm not really that tuned in to the sounds, to be honest. But what I'm going to do is just have a wee coffee, and then I'll head back and look for more opportunities as I head back to the car. So we'll keep the country tidy code. I always bring a wee bag with a fastener so that I can take my rubbish home with me. And here's hoping this water is warm. Bag's had a real pounding this morning, climbing over trees and under trees, and all the moss and everything's still damp and wet. But the beauty about the moss being wet is it actually glows a lot greener, so the saturation of colours is really strong. And that's another thing I'll have to watch out for when I'm doing my post-processing, that sometimes when you take photographs in woods and the mosses are so vibrant, it can look unnatural. But we can tone that down, we can reduce the vibrance, but let's wait and see. Some people like oversaturated photos, some people like natural. It's anyone's personal choice. So I'm just about to have my wee cereal bath and enjoy my coffee and listen to the sounds, and I'll pick up back with you on the journey back. So on my way back, I've just stopped as I walk through the trees, but as you can see, and I'll show you, I don't know if that's visible on the back of my camera, but there's a kind of wee hole as you walk through the trees. So what I was going to try and do is take a photo of that and then in post-process and see what kind of impact or effects we can get from it, because in the daylight I can see the light coming through between the trees. There's a lot of shadows, colours are nice, so I'm going to take this shot. I'm going to zoom into the centre of this, into the shot as well, and then hopefully it turns out and you get to see it at the end of this reel. Okay, well, thank you for watching my YouTube video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and remember, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. If you're new to YouTube, subscribe is free. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.